Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I'm off strong painkillers, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now today's ink, I have in sample form. It's Graf Von Faber-Castell's Cobalt Blue. It's nice, deep, rich blue. Now, the pens I used, it's kind of odd. So this is a 0.8 stub. It's a fair medium stub, you know, considering, well, yeah. And then also this Hero 616, which generally has a quite fine nib. The thing is, I forgot that this Hero 616 used to have a particularly troublesome ink in it that I used to like. So I sort of, like, I just barely gouged out the feed in this. So I forgot that it was really wet. So this is actually quite wet for a fine. So the larger nib was much drier. The smaller nib was much wetter. Usually not how it goes, but yeah. So thought I'd compare it to a few other inks. Here's Cobalt Blue. And the thing is, I couldn't find anything quite like this because this is a very dark, rich blue, but it tends to really have this intense red sheen that gives it just this like hint of purple to it. Like it's got a little bit of red in it, so I couldn't find anything quite like it. Noodler's Kung De Chang, which is exclusive to Goulet, I believe, it's just a little too close to purple. And also Private Reserve Invincible Blue, which was just a little too light, but I don't know if the camera's going to pick it up, but it's very blue until it gets laid on kind of heavy, and then it turns like kind of purpley in those areas. So I couldn't find anything exactly like it. But let's check out the chromatography, which is weird but cool. So here's how you're generally supposed to do chromatography. Put a little dot, instantly dunk it in water. You can definitely tell where that dot was. It is very purpley. And then you get this purple into this like nice straight medium blue, and then there's this very dark blue band up at the top. And then I let it dry, which is not how you're supposed to do it, but then something very weird happened. The dot got much, much darker, and it was like it retained more of that blue, and less of the blue wanted to go up to the top. There's less of a separation. The band up at the top is definitely not as distinct. Weird, but kind of cool. Alright, paper test. Top down in density, Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. Try and hold this still. See, it's a deep, dark, rich blue. It's pretty nice. And oh, in there, you can kind of see it in the C in Cobalt. See that red sheen? It's in the heaviest part, so amusingly, it actually shows up most in the fine. Since the line is so tiny, it's hard to get on camera. There's not a ton of it on here. There's just a few spots where it kind of comes through. Now, the fine took 8 seconds to dry. The stub took 13, which I don't really know why, because that stub's actually fairly dry. I'm not going to be able to get the sheen, but yeah, I tried, I promise. Now, I laid it on really thick to try and bring out some of that sheen, so it almost came through the other side, but that's user error. No bleed, no feather, no spread. Very well behaved in that regard. I'd say the flow, when natural, is about a 5.5 out of 10. It just goes. I would not call it wet. I'd say that the fine pen is wet, and I'd say that the stub is quite dry, but considering how dry that stub is, it did pretty alright. Now, here's what's kind of cool about that chromatography. Now, a lot of that blue washed away, and it did make a bit of a mess, but you can very distinctly see that purple right at the center. Isn't that kind of cool? Next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter, where the fine took 7 seconds to dry, and the 0.8 stub took 13. And because the stub is drier, and that edge of the stub kind of pulls the ink around, you get much better shading in the stub, but you get much more richness in that really wet fine. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to get the sheen on camera, but there's a bit of it in the scrubby. Again, in the C in Cobalt, that entire bit. I'm not going to be able to get the fine on camera, but that's where most of it is, darn it. But yeah, no bleed, no feather, no spread. There is sheen. There's really not much echo, but that could be because the stub is fairly dry and the fine is, you know, fairly fine line. Because it is pretty dark for a blue. But again, the water test, you can really see that purple at the middle, and it did make a bit of a mess. But if you absolutely had to recover it, you could. You would just have to look for purple instead of blue. Next is Tomoe River Paper, which is known for drawing out dry times, which it most certainly did. It's also known for bringing out sheen, and hopefully I'll be able to get this on camera. Because, I mean, this is almost like electric DC blue levels of sheen. It is all throughout. Even in, like, some of the drier areas of that stub, it is just everywhere. Like, if you were to look at head on, it'd be blue, but if you looked at it just to the side, you can just see this, like, shimmer of red all throughout. So, yeah, it's very blue, but in the darkest areas, it does sort of hint towards purple because you can get a sense of that red sheen coming through. But yeah, no bleed, no feather, no spread. Again, the stub, because it's a bit drier and it has that edge, it really shows that lovely shading. I like this color of blue. I was really enjoying it. I'm glad that I actually accidentally ordered 2 samples, and so have almost a full vial. So that's kind of nice, but yeah, again, Tomoe River loves to let ink slide away when you add more water, and that definitely happened here. But again, what remains is sort of that very distinct purple. Next up, 20-pound copier paper. Now usually I use the finer nib on the 3 cheaper papers, but since the larger nib was drier and the smaller one was wetter, I decided to just try and use both all throughout. So, yeah. The stub took 1 second to dry. The fine dried almost instantly, but I think that's just because it was wetter and just like would sink in more. It's still a very dark, rich blue. You know, it's like a hearty blue, but yeah. I don't know if this is going to come through just because the line is quite small, but it's very woolly. You do get a good bit of feathering. Oddly, the stub does a bit better. You almost have a bit of shading remaining, but yeah. So this is the world's worst copier paper. So I'm not shocked that this wet fine is just massacring it. But yeah, the stub actually isn't too bad. So, but yeah, it's a mess. This blue is just like, it's just like pouring out blue everywhere. But because the paper's more absorbent, it sort of sucks it in and it's harder to wash all of it out. So I think if you absolutely had to cover that, you could. It would just look like tie-dye. Next up is Mead Notebook Paper. Again, where I used both pens. The stub took 3 seconds to dry, the fine nib took 2. And again, the stub is doing quite well on here. You actually retain a bit of shading. You don't get feathering with the stub. You kind of do with the fine, but again, because the line is kind of fine, it's hard to pick up on camera. But yeah, it's again, it still retains that sort of like dark richness of a royal blue, which is kind of nice. The stub, because it is fairly dry, it was starting to struggle with the absorbency of the papers, but yeah, again, kind of a mess. It just exploded blue everywhere. The wet fine did kind of feather a bit, but not too bad. The stub did quite well. But yeah, here, you can definitely see which lines were written by that wet fine. Yeah. Now, lastly is Moleskine notebook paper, where I don't know what's going on with Moleskine, but yeah, again, the stub did a bit better. You retain a little bit of shading. In fact, like the dots actually have this tiny red sheen halo. But yeah, anyways, the stub took 5 seconds to dry. The wet fine took 3.5, which I cannot explain. But yeah. There is bleed, feather, and spread in the fine. The stub doesn't have quite as much of that. And again, it's almost amusing how clear the difference is between the wet fine and the dry stub. So, I mean, the dry stub, that's not too bad. This wet fine, not good. So, now this paper hates water. It always does weird things with water. So it just absolutely feathered and exploded and all kinds of weird stuff. So I don't know how recoverable it would be on here, but... So, there you go. There's Graf Von Faber-Castell's Cobalt Blue. It's a wonderfully deep, rich blue. It has an potential for an incredible red sheen. Not the most abundant amount of wetness, but I wouldn't necessarily call it dry. Yeah, so, but in a dry pen, it behaves very well on shaped paper. So, for your consideration from the Triple N Network, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching.